Welcome back to Chatter on the Wire. Today we're going to take a look at adding some sides onto an existing plow. So as you can see, I ended up making this out of wood. My long-term goal is, if this works out, is to probably get this, cut some stuff out of sheet metal and attach it onto the side. I also want I want one or both sides to actually be removable so that we can go ahead and use the angle of the plow and push snow off to the side periodically. Thankfully, we don't get a lot of snow in our area, but when we do, it is nice to have this to clean some of the driveway. So the goal here was to try to use the clamps to latch this 2x4 onto the blade, but there was no good flat spot on the blade to make this happen. Eventually I finally got smart and gave up on this idea. One of the main problems I had was the sheer numbness of my fingers during all this. I couldn't really hold on to things for very long, and it had already been quite a long day by the time I started this project. So at this time I'm taking some of the plywood that I had rough cut out the previous day and started to try to figure out exactly where I needed to shave off a few more centimeters here or there, or tweak so that it would fit in here perfectly. So the plywood I had was about a ½ inch. I decided to add a second piece on the outside of this. The original goal was to potentially add something on the back side of the plow to help hold this on, so that's part of the reason it sticks out on the back. That doesn't appear to be needed after I've got this all built out, or that's kind of what I've since decided, but at this point in time in the build I wasn't aware of that, and wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to fall apart the first use. Gonna try to line this up, do a best guess, and put the first hole through this. 2x4 I had on the back end of this was probably about a 10 or 15-year-old 2x4, so it was rock solid to say the least, and I had to pre-drill everything on this. Otherwise, even with the impact driver, I'm not sure I would have got some of these screws in. At this point, it's time to eyeball that and see if we can get the second hole drilled through this and into that 2x4 without missing and or drilling out the side. As I mentioned earlier, I was pretty well fried by this time of the day and really shouldn't have been trying to do this project, but we were expecting a couple inches of snow the next morning, which was the only reason I was working on this late on a Saturday. I really had no idea if 2 screws into this 2x4 and the pressure on the back of this blade would be enough to hold this in place. In theory, there shouldn't be that much pressure from any of the snow, but we'll see once we actually get a chance to use this. At this point, it's pretty well rinse and repeat on the other side. Had I been thinking this through, I would have actually cut both of the end pieces at the exact same time. I did try to trace it out and trim it a bit, and I got pretty close, but I still was off a little here or there. And the biggest problem I had really was trying to figure out the angle I wanted the bottom plate to be at. With that said though, at the end of the day I just guessed. Cut it at probably about a 15-degree angle, give or take, and decided to call that good. So the original two holes were actually already in the edge of the plow. They're actually designed for flags to be put in there, so I didn't have to drill those out. But when I did put the screws in, my original plan was actually to use some bolts I had. They were a little too big for those holes, so I went with some screws. The problem was when I drilled out the initial holes in the 2x4, I used the wrong size, so the screw was holding to the 2x4, but since it was only in two places there and it was an oversized drill hole, I decided I would go ahead and add two more holes into the plow and attach this better, and this time make sure I use the right size drill bit into the wood. One of the problems I ran into though is the main drill bit I was using is not rated for an impact driver, and since I didn't have a normal drill with me and only had the impact driver, it ended up actually shearing the attachment off to the drill bit. Thankfully I had drill bits that were actually rated for impact drivers, put that in afterwards and used it to finish out the holes. I probably should have actually drilled a smaller pilot hole initially and then enlarged it, but I figured these were small enough holes in the first place that it wouldn't be a big deal. Only cost me one drill bit. So here's what the blade looked like before. As you can see, nothing special. And here's what it looked like after. Probably really, at the end of the day, still nothing special. The other project I got to work on while I was there that day was actually adding new skid plates. The original ones had worn out about halfway through or 3/4 of the way through last season, and we hadn't got around to ordering any new ones, which is part of the reason the edges of that blade are actually rounded. We had looked into new skid plates a little last year, and someone had tried to buy a type for a different type of blade that didn't end up working out quite right. So I ordered a new set about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and when I was looking at them originally, people wanted up to $55 for brand new ones. Thankfully Amazon had a set that I found that was $6.50 each. Granted, the shipping and handling on them was like $7 or $9, but that price was for as many as you wanted. So knowing that we were going to burn through these again this year and probably next year again, I decided to go ahead and buy 4 in total, all for the exact same shipping cost. Probably should have gone for 6 or 10 of them, for quite honestly, but there isn't anything special about these. I will probably manufacture some of our own for next year or year after, whenever we burn through the existing ones here. The biggest problem I had on this compared to my snowblower at home was what height to put this off of the ground. I made an initial guess at this, and after looking at it the next day when I showed back up, I decided that was a little too high, so I readjusted them and slammed them almost all the way to the ground, but they are still probably about the same height as I would use on my snowblower, which is about the width of 2 quarters stacked on top of each other. So a little bonus footage here. Here is where I was trying to figure out the angle and approximate height I wanted to cut the side panels off at, and you can see the gap that I initially had in between the blade and the side panel. Anyways, thanks for joining me. We'll find out how well this works down the road. Real quick, here's a picture of what it looked like the next day. The snow that was predicted, of course, didn't show up. Always common in Idaho. But since then we've had a couple more snowfalls. I haven't had to utilize this yet to remove snow. Anyways, thanks for joining me. Catch you next time.